Hello, ladies and gents. Today we're going to be talking about a hyposane framework, which would be hypo-absolutism. I see this pretty much daily. And so to explain what hypo-absolutism is, we have to explain the traditional definition of moral absolutism. Moral absolutism is a meta-ethical view that some or even all actions are intrinsically right or wrong. That's like saying all murder is wrong. But this is inherently wrong because for the simplistic fact of that it would claim that self-defense is wrong, that you are not allowed to defend yourself if someone's trying to murder you. So obviously, moral absolutism is deeply flawed. So intrinsically right or wrong, regardless of context or consequence. Comparison with other ethical theories. Moral absolutism is not the same as moral universalism. Universalism holds merely that what is right or wrong is independent of custom or opinion, as opposed to moral relativism, but not necessarily that what is right or wrong is sometimes independent of context or consequences, as in absolutism. Moral absolutism, there is at least one principle that ought to never be violated. Moral objectivism, there is a fact of the matter as to whether any given action is morally permissible or impermissible, as a fact of the matter that does not depend solely on social custom or individual acceptance. Ethical theories which place strong emphasis on rights and duty, such as deontological ethics or of Immanuel Kant, are often considered forms of moral absolutism, as are many religious moral codes, which is why religion is deeply inherently immoral. Hypo-absolutism is a reasoning failure where a person treats a partial truth, a limited pattern, an emotional reaction, or a contextual observation as if it were an absolute universal law. It states that because this one person used a shovel as a weapon, that all shovels are inherently weapons. So someone makes a claim, AI is fascistic. This is easily disproven by showing one example of someone using a tool, etc., outside of a fascistic outcome method. An example would be a disabled person using AI to promote learning directly or indirectly. Learning is not fascistic inherently. It collapses complexity into totality. Instead of asking, when is this true, under what conditions, compared to what, with what evidence, with what exceptions, with what consequences, hypo-absolutism declares this is always true, this is never acceptable, this thing is inherently evil, this group is inherently guilty, this tool is inherently corrupt, this conclusion is beyond question. Absolutism is not certainty earned through evidence. It is certainty used to escape analysis. It's lazy. It's a lazy excuse to not critically think, analyze honestly, and ignore complex reality. Why it is hyposane. Hypo-absolutism is hyposane because it replaces reality with a rigid mental shortcut. Reality contains conditions, exceptions, context, distinctions, trade-offs, and competing variables. A great example of this is veganism. Veganism isn't absolutism. People think that veganism is absolutism, that like you can never eat meat, but veganism allows eating meat if it's like a survival situation. This is why veganism doesn't attack tribes or people in food deserts or poverty situations or survival situations, because it's not practicable or logical to sit there and say, well, you should die if eating meat is literally your only option. Absolutism removes those variables so the person does not have to think anymore. This creates false clarity. The person feels morally certain, but that certainty came from flattening the problem rather than understanding it. Feeling something doesn't make it true. It just means you feel something. Hypo-absolutism usually follows this pattern. A real harm, danger, misuse, or injustice is identified. The person emotionally reacts to that harm. The reaction is converted into a universal rule. Well, this person used this tool as a means of fascism. Therefore, anyone that uses this tool is a fascist. Context and exceptions are treated as excuses. Anyone who asks for nuance is accused of defending the harm. The absolutist position becomes immune to correction. So these people cannot be reasoned with using logic or facts. This is how partial truth becomes an ideological weapon. A hypersane statement is AI can be used for exploitation, surveillance, propaganda, and manipulation. A hypo-absolutist statement is AI is inherently fascist. The first statement identifies danger while preserving analysis. The second statement collapses the tool, the user, the intent, the method, and the consequence into one moral category. That collapse prevents accurate ethical reasoning. Imagine calling someone paralyzed below the neck using AI to survive a fascist. They're not. They're disabled. And this is why moral absolutism almost always leads to fascism, because you're discriminating against minorities like the disabled who don't use things fascistically. They are using things to survive. So they're blaming a minority for what the majority does. That is fascism. That is fascistic. That is oppression. That is oppressive. So produce reasoning failures. Absolutism tool collapse. Treating a tool as morally identical to its worst use. Because this person uses it in its worst possible means, everyone uses it to its worst possible means. Every situation is completely identical. There's no such thing as nuance. There's no such thing as context. And reality is simply emotions. Category collapse, which is erasing distinctions between related but non identical things. Moral flattening is reducing complex ethical analysis into one totalitizing accusation. False moral certainty is mistaking emotional conviction for ethical proof. Because I feel this way emotionally, it's objectively true, which obviously isn't how reality works. You can feel like it's raining. That doesn't mean that it's raining. Emotions have no place entirely as an absolutist stance for ethics. A psychopath absolutely enjoys hurting people. That doesn't mean that they should murder people or hurt people simply because they feel good. Context erasure, removing conditions, exceptions, and usage from analysis. Association as essence, treating what something is associated with as what it inherently is. Nuance reversal, treating clarification, distinction, or context as moral betrayal. Trying to ask questions about questions or ask why you think it is fascistic gets you labeled as fascistic for simply asking questions. The correction to absolutism is not relativism. The correction is conditional precision. A hypersane analysis does not say nothing is true. It asks what is true? When is it true? Why is it true? How far does this claim extend? Where does it stop being true? What evidence supports it? What evidence limits it? What distinctions are being collapsed and ignored? Hyper-Sanity does not reject strong moral claims. It rejects lazy, totalitizing claims. Diagnostic questions. When detecting hypo-absolutism, ask, is this claim universal when it should be conditional? Is a tool being blamed for a user's intention? Is a group being treated as one mind? Is context being dismissed as an excuse? Is nuance being framed as betrayal? Is the person using moral certainty to avoid evidence? Are they collapsing use, intent, consequence, and identity into one thing? Usually they are. Are exceptions being ignored because they weaken the emotional force of the claim? Usually, yes. There is a distinction between this can be used harmfully and this is inherently harmful. There is a difference between this system often enables abuse and every person using this system is abusive. There is a difference between this tool can serve fascistic purposes and this tool is fascistic by nature. The first version allows analysis. The second version shuts analysis down. It is lazy. Hypo-absolutism is the refusal to think past the first morally satisfying conclusion. It feels strong because it is simple, but simplicity is not always clarity. Sometimes simplicity is just complexity that has been destroyed. Reality is complex. When you simplify something inherently complex, you lose most of the meaning. You lose the scope. You lose the ability to analyze. You lose the ability to ask questions. And if you can no longer ask questions about something, well, then you're practicing fascism. Tool use collapse. Tool use collapse is a hyposane reasoning failure where someone mistakes a tool for the worst purpose it has been used for. It collapses the tool, the user, the intention, the method, the consequence. This would be like saying that everyone that uses a gun is a school shooter. That's how crazy moral absolutism is, and that's why people using moral absolutism against AI are acting purely out of emotion and not rational, logical um, analysis or science or anything, reasonable or sane. It's not sane to sit there and use moral absolutism and say, well, everyone's using this tool exactly the same way. That's objectively untrue. That's easily proven untrue. All you need to do is prove it. All you need to do is show one instance where someone isn't using it completely as a fascistic method, and then the moral absolutist claim is completely defeated. Absolutism as tool confusion. One of the most dangerous modes of hyposane reasoning is absolutism, the collapse of context, intention, usage, and consequence into one rigid claim. Absolutism is not analysis, it is flattening. It takes a complex situation and reduces it into a totalitizing statement. This is no different than what the Nazis did to black people and saying that black people are absolutely less intelligent. You can see how absolutism, moral absolutism, leads often to discrimination against minorities, such as disabled are a minority. It takes a complex situation and reduces it into this thing is always bad. This tool is inherently fascist. Anyone who uses this is guilty by association. This is hyposane because it refuses distinction. It does not ask how something is being used, who is using it, what purpose it serves, or what consequences follow. It replaces reasoning with reaction. A tool can be used ethically or unethically. The moral status of a tool depends on who is using it, why they are using it, who is affected by it, whether it increases harm or reduces harm, whether it expands autonomy or suppresses autonomy. If you're arguing against AI for the disabled, then you're arguing against autonomy, which is no different than saying women shouldn't be able to vote and that women should not have reproductive rights over their own bodies. It's no different. Calling a tool inherently fascist skips the actual ethical analysis part. If a fascist uses a computer to influence or oppress people, that does not make computers fascist. It means a fascist used a computer for fascistic purposes. If someone uses a shovel as a weapon, that does not mean shovels are inherently weapons. It means the tool was weaponized. The same thing logically applies to AI. AI can be used for propaganda, manipulation, surveillance, exploitation, and control. But AI can also be used for accessibility, education, disability support, research, communication, writing assistance, organization, and survival. The tool itself is not the full ethical object. The full ethical object is the relationship between the tool, user, purpose, target, and consequence. Hyposane pattern. Identify a tool used by harmful people. Collapse the tool into harm. Declare all use of the tool immoral. Ignore ethical distinctions. Attack users instead of analyzing usage. This is not moral clarity. This is a category collapse. It mistakes association for essence. Again, this is no different than saying, well, if you use a gun, you're a school shooter because school shooters all use guns. So therefore, all guns can only be used by school shooters or are used in school shootings. That is not objectively true. A hypersane analysis asks who is using the tool, for what purpose, against whom, with what consequences. Does it reduce harm or increase harm? Does it expand autonomy or suppress it? Is the use exploitative, educational, accessible, coercive, or liberating? This restores context. It moves the discussion away from absolutist labeling and back into ethical reasoning. Example: AI is fascist. Hypersane correction. AI is not inherently fascist. AI is a tool that can be used in fascistic ways, capitalist ways, educational ways, accessibility focused ways, or survival focused ways. The ethical question is not whether the tool exists, but how it is used, by whom, and towards what outcome. A disabled person using AI for communication, learning, survival, accessibility, and education is not the same thing as a corporation using AI for exploitation, survival, or surveillance, or propaganda. Flattening those into the same moral category, it is itself hyposane. It is less sane. There is a distinction between this tool can be used for fascistic purposes and this tool is inherently fascist. The first claim allows analysis. The second claim shuts analysis down. That shutdown is the danger. Absolutism creates false moral certainty by removing complexity. Calling the tool itself fascist avoids the real ethical question. Who is using it, for what purpose, against whom, and with what consequences? That is the difference between analysis and blind emotional reaction with no logical or critical thinking or anything sane behind it. Hyper-Sanity requires the ability to distinguish the tool, the user, the intent, the method, and the result. Hypo-Sanity collapses them into all one emotional accusation, which is why moral absolutism is usually morally which is morally incorrect.